Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Gregory Reid. Reid is his last name. And if you're watching this on YouTube, X, Rumble, or Rockfin, you'll see the cover of his new book. It's published late in 2025. Full title is The Real Satanic Panic Story. Satanic Panic in quotes, documenting the reality of occult crime and ritual abuse, an eyewitness account. And it's a perfect fit for my show. I've done a lot of shows on this subject and covered True Detective, which is fictional, West Memphis 3, so many other occult crimes. And so many times it's just like putting the satanic panic myth to rest. But I'm glad to have him on the show to talk about this. He has firsthand accounts, and he also has a very long bio and has worked with many law enforcement people and has just done so many things. I think he's on his 11th book. This might be his 11th or 12th. He has been in youth ministry since 1975. He's a graduate of Christ for the Nations Bible School in Dallas, and he's kind of centered in Texas. So a lot of the background stories he tells are based in Texas. And he holds an honorary degree from Logos Graduate School and is also an ordained minister with the American Evangelistic Association, director of Youth Fire Ministry. He served as youth pastor at Crosspoint Church in El Paso for 7 years. He's also a retired private investigator with over 20 years experience as a contract criminal justice trainer on occult crimes and crimes against children. Like I said, he's the author of 11 books. Other titles are Trojan Church, A Cry in the Wilderness, The Color of Pain, and The War of the Ages, a complete scriptural guide to confronting and defeating Satan's kingdom. And we were just talking in the pre-show. I was jogging my memory. I knew his name. It came to my attention on social media that he had published a new book. So I reached out to him and he agreed. But I remember watching him at the end of a Tom Dunn documentary. And he was talking about some place in LA in the Valley, if I remember. He can probably jog my memory more. But it's a really interesting documentary. But also at the intro to the book, there are some names that I'm familiar with, which is Dale Griffiths, who worked on the West Memphis 3. And he also mentions the late Russ Dizdar. I have a signed copy of Russ Dizdar. I actually reposted an old interview I did with Russ Dizdar from 2014. It's unbelievable. It's been over 10 years. But he's also included other names, other people who've kind of been in, and I'm pretty sure one of them was a occult crimes investigator from San Francisco, but maybe you can kind of fill in some of these other names: Yvonne Peterson, Ken Wooden, Galen Hurst, Lauren Stratford, and Sue Joyner. But anyway, kind of an overly long intro. The guest again is Gregory Reid, and the book again is The Real Satanic Panic Story. So, Greg Reid, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
For people who haven't heard your name, maybe not your background, you've been in youth ministry and ministry for over, seems like 3 decades, and you've worked with Tom Dunn and others. Maybe you could just talk about your background leading all the way up to this book, The Real Satanic Panic.
Oh, short version is I grew up in Southern California and was brought into an occult group at a very young age, beyond my parents' control. And it involved me in child pornography as well as occult rituals, which included a human sacrifice of someone that I knew. And that pretty much messed me up for life. And as a result, I began to involve myself in the occult very heavily and began to practice everything I could imagine. And by the time I was 14, I was pretty suicidal, but I had a very real encounter with Jesus Christ and abandoned all of that. And for the next, dozen or so years, had to put the pieces together of what had happened to me as a child. And then in 1987, I moved to El Paso, Texas to work with a group called the Watch Network. You mentioned the name Sue Joyner. We had no idea what we were doing at the time. We were just giving little presentations at churches and had no idea what we were about to walk into, because in 87, there was a tsunami of occult crimes and kids involved in the occult that just was all over the country. And next thing you know, we're asking to train medical departments for the Army, um, probation departments, law enforcement classes. And in that course of time, uh, we trained probably over 250 criminal justice classes, mainly in Texas, but also in other states. And we also involved ourselves very heavily in groups that were trafficking in children and trying to break them up. And it got us to a point where we got found out who the big boys were and did our best to expose all of that. And somewhere around 1990, they pushed back and created the national satanic panic narrative, which pretty much just buried us. Within about 5 years, we went from maybe 250 people across the country that worked on these cases down to about five when it was all over with.
Was on mute. So there was kind of a concerted effort to, you think, to forestall these occult crime investigations. Do you think that it was like an intended like layout of some type of coordinated program?
Well, you know the expression, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right.
Um, you know, paranoia for me is a heightened state of awareness.
I just lost you
Came
for a
from
second.
law enforcement. Okay, are we back?
Yeah, we're back. Sorry.
Okay, this movement came from, first of all, somebody very high up in the FBI who was telling everybody that there's no such thing as satanic criminal activity.
Was his name Ken Lanning, perhaps?
It absolutely was.
Right.
And he said he'd never seen one hair, not one drop of blood, nothing. That started to undermine what we were doing when we did presentations, because we'd have somebody get up and say, well, Ken Lanning said da da da. You say you know more than Ken Lanning? I'm like, well, yeah, I actually can plug my computer in the wall and work it and gather evidence. I mean, it's there. Um, and then come from a group called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, uh, which at least one of their board members um, was very pro pedophile and had been actually quoted in major Danish pedophile magazine or Dutch pedophile magazine called Pideka.
Was that
And
Eberly? Was that Eberly?
no, his name was Dr. Ralph Underweger.
Ungerwager, that's right.
Yeah. And then from the Christian community, there was a group out of Chicago that started to write articles saying that it was all a fraud. They started with my friend Mike Warnke, who was an ex-Satanist. They took him out. Then they went after my friend Lauren Stratford and they destroyed her. And then they wrote a bunch of other articles. By that time, the people who wrote those articles, I think, coined the phrase satanic panic. And that's the narrative that stayed. And to this day, if you type in satanic crime or whatever occult crimes in the internet, first thing you come up with is about a dozen or no more websites that say satanic panic. So that's the way it all came down.
It's incredible. And I have this quote. This is from Ted Gunderson. This is actually from the Franklin Scandal, this book. And he quoted, this is a quote from him. I seem to be repeating this often. It is Gunderson commented on the effect of Lanning's disclaimers. Quote, this is from Gunderson. In my opinion, other than Satanists active in the United States in the 20th century, Aleister Crowley, Anton LaVey, and Michael Aquino, Ken Lanning is probably the most effective and foremost speaker for the satanic movement in this country today or any time in the past. It's an incredible statement from Gunderson, like a known law enforcement officer.
Yeah, Ted and I did some work together back in the day, and I have to agree with him. I hate to use. I try to be kind with my words, but the word "useful idiot" comes into play for me. Um, I had some communication with Mr. Lanning back in the day that came to nothing, but I did offer. I said, "Look, I will pay your way down here if you want. I'll open up my files to you. You know, whatever you want." But that door, he never went through that door. So for whatever reason, and these other players, people like Anton LaVey was good PR. Never have any evidence that he committed a crime. Michael Aquino is different in many ways. I don't know what I can't say that he ever committed a crime, but I was kind of shocked that he actually died, and to my knowledge, committed suicide last year. And that's when we started to see a shift in the whole occult picture in the United States. And they began to push the satanic panic in the media again. I thought, well, why? You guys already won 30 years ago. Why are you doing this now? And then when I heard that Aquino had died, I thought, okay, I get it, because the law of the Luciferians is where one head is cut off, another will succeed. And it was simply a changing of the guard. And so now they're kind of reworking their uh, network so that this subject doesn't come up again.
Wow. And he was credibly accused. I did a show on Aquino. He was credibly accused in the Presidio. And there was a network of SRA going from, like I just talked about, the Franklin scandal from Omaha to San Francisco. And it just metastasized. So it was really there in the 80s. There's absolutely no question about it.
Absolutely.
It's factual. Like, that's evidentiary stuff.
Yeah.
But Dale Griffiths, one of the interesting things about Griffiths, he was a great guy, but he also had files, like almost encyclopedic files of occult crimes. Like, he was a really fastidious records keeper. I don't know if his records have been kept or scanned into the thing, but I know he's passed away. But a lot of these guys, there's a lot of investigators who've done. There was an occult crimes investigator in San Francisco. There've
Sandy
been
Gallant.
What was her name?
Sandy Gallant.
That's her. Yeah, good memory. She wrote a book. Like, she had all the stuff. Like, and they either shut her out or something like that. But she was like a dedicated occult crimes investigator.
And there were a lot of those. Larry Jones, who had an excellent newsletter, I think called File 18. And then somebody had accessed their database, and he got a threat from the Witches League for Public Awareness, and a letter was sent out to all the people on the mailing list, said we're going to watch you for even one little misstep. We're going to sue you.
Wow.
So we realized early on their network was far better than ours, and it has proven to be so even now. When my last book, The Real Satanic Panic Story, came out, I did a broadcast with a friend of mine, Doreen Virtue, a couple of probably about a month ago now, and it took their crawlers approximately probably an hour to get on the YouTube channel and make sure the first comment was Satanic Panic. None of this stuff is real.
Right.
So they're very organized.
And it's like they just have these already preset responses. Like, you're panicking, there's no evidence. And it's the same thing over and over. Like, I've dealt with it for 15 years. Well, 13. Well, actually, since I did that book on Crowley in 2010. It's just the same. I mean, you can just read Crowley's material. He's doing rituals. He's involving kids, like the what's the one he does? He does this one ritual involving kids. So it's really grim. And there's so many. I put so many occult crime stuff in my book, Abomination, just to show, like, this is really a global pattern, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's known by different names. They're not all connected. They certainly are supportive of one another, but now just in the last 20 years, we have Santa Muerte, which we'd never heard of that before. And they're one of the most grisly human sacrifice groups that's around. And then we have, I can't even count the different groups that have come up. You have Strega witchcraft, which is Italian witchcraft. That stuff is nasty. And so there's an organizational aspect to it. But the higher you go up, the harder it is to trace who's who. I mean, now we talked a lot about the Illuminati. Is it real? Yes, it is. Do people like Jay-Z and Beyonce belong to it? Sure. But they're just the gum under the shoe of what they call the Illuminati. The real term behind that is probably going to be Luciferians. But in their circles, they really don't have a name. But their motto, I guess, is the guarantee of our tomorrow is today's perception that we do not exist. So it's really hard to know who the real players are at that level, but you can get a sense of it as you start to pull the fish in from the stream. Some of the bigger fish start to come a little closer to shore, and you can start to determine some other things from that. And I think the whole thing with Jeffrey Epstein, P. Diddy, whatever level the occult was involved. I mean, I called the Epstein thing. The minute they arrested him and took him to New York, I thought they're going to suicide him. And that's what I believe happened. They got the black book. Ghislaine Maxwell took off for a while. when they found her, I believe she was in an In-N-Out burger in Los Angeles and kind of a disheveled little dress. And, um, she was reading a book on the heroes of the CIA. I'm like, is anybody getting this? That was her way of saying, I'm ready to come on back to the reservation and cut a deal. And I believe that's what she did.
Right. Come back in from the cold would be the intel terminology.
Yes.
So these guys were all intel. Yeah. I heard a story here in LA that they were having celebrations before Epstein was suicided because they knew it was coming. Like, that's how bad it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and the P. Diddy thing, I knew the minute it went to trial, I knew they were going to get rid of all the RICO charges and all the federal charges, and just some little slap on the wrist. He'll serve a few years in jail, and that's that. Anything to cover up who's really, really involved. And see, I have a lot of respect for those who've done the work in this world. I'm very thankful for that. But I learned a long time ago, like most of those groups, what they're dealing with is, and it's horrible that anybody's been involved in that, but they were getting teenage girls who'd been turned into prostitutes, or little girls who'd been over in Thailand. And I thought, I'm glad those girls are getting out. I mean, because they should not have to go through that. But that's what the other side considers an acceptable business loss, as long as nobody goes up the chain and finds out who's really, really supporting all this and,
Right.
and
That's a
paying
really
for all
good
this.
point. That's a really good point. These big conspiracies have some kind of controller, and they found it in this Charlie Kirk. I don't know if you've heard this, but there's been some investigators. One guy's name is Baron Coleman, and he's investigating, and they found out that this guy who was sitting on the TPUSA board is Vallely, who wrote the book Mind War with Aquino. And Barron actually found
Oh,
out. Have you heard that?
I knew about Paul Vallely for
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
He literally is sitting on the board. He was an advisor on there. And there was another guy who wrote Mind War who was also involved in TPUSA. These are
Wow, I
very
did not know
sinister
that.
people. I can pull up a picture of Paul Vallely using the Masonic hand gesture with a finger to his head, which means that he knows the secret knowledge. But
Well,
they
that's an interesting thing too, because one of the changes that we're seeing right now is the Masonic Order is now going very public, in at least in our area, in recruiting new people into the order. And I have never seen that before. I mean, at least in our town, they've been very secretive. They get very upset if they're talked about, but now they're on TikTok and saying it's a great family organization if you want to be a better father and husband. I'm like, what? So something's changing in the ground level of where all this is going, and I haven't got a clear picture on it yet. Yep, there he is. Yeah.
try that again, unmuted, sorry. He's making a point to his head, but he's making the sign of the square. So he's got his left hand underneath his right. These are all like magical gestures, but there he is, advisory board member, Turning Point.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. But let
I
me
I
finish
knew it
this,
was.
Greg.
Go ahead.
Some of this guy Barron looked into Aquino's PO box, and they found out who else used that PO box. And there was a super rich guy who's like a billionaire who also works with or who's affiliated with Aquino and getting mail at the same box that Aquino was getting. I can't remember his name right now, but it's almost like this sinister money person behind all this. So when you say the higher ups we don't know, it's like this guy Coleman's just saying there's all kinds of Satanists around Charlie Kirk. It's unbelievable.
Well, I wasn't surprised. I liked Charlie. I liked what he was doing, but I knew the minute he was assassinated that they already had some people in place to try and co-opt the Turning Point. And I know that there's at least, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I know for a fact that at least three elements are trying to co-opt it. One is the Catholic Church, and one is the politicians, and the other one is the Mormon Church, and they're all trying to get in position. So I knew that it was being compromised almost from the minute he got shot, and it's very sad. I wish they would have not allowed Erica to take her platform. She needed to grieve, not be elevated to a point where, I mean, my God, her husband was murdered in public. Who in their right mind asked her to be the head of this organization? It's astonishing.
It's all very strange. You know how powerful they were? Like, I didn't know that much about Kirk, but like, they're a $1 billion corporation. They were generating 80 to $100 million a year. Think
Wow.
about the impact. That's a lot of money. A
Yeah,
lot
it
of people
is.
were making money in $1 million, houses and things like that, and private flights. So there's a lot at stake. Kirk was really extraordinary, but there were a lot of jackals around him. I totally agree with
Well,
that.
he was a real threat, and I think
Yeah.
I'm not in the Candace Owen camp or Tucker Carlson anymore because I come from a Jewish background, and when they started to go down the Elders of the Protocols of Zion route, I'm like, I am so through with you folks. Whatever truth you may have, it's already been compromised. But I see that they were going in a direction where it was going to be hard to know what was what, but I do believe, just for myself, I believe that he was assassinated by some contingency that just wanted him to shut up.
Yeah, I think you're right. He was too vocal and he was too honest, I think. I think that was kind of like he was became a liability at
Yeah,
some point last year, but that may have been like a really overt occult crime because there's all kinds of weird things around this case that beggar belief. But I mean, it wouldn't be the first time an assassination or some big event had some kind of occult impact or influence on it. Like,
that's a fact.
and you had, I mean, you're in Texas, so you were there for the whole Matamoros situation. You mentioned Mark Kilroy in your book. I mean, there's just so many. The amount of cult crimes are really legion, I think, is one way to put it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And most of them do not get discovered. And that's why we valued the work that we did because we were dealing with boots on the ground, law enforcement, probation people who they really did not know what they were looking at. And we just happened to have enough tools to be able to say, well, we can probably tell you who, what, where, when, and why if you let us give you these tools. And there were several cases that were successfully prosecuted because they had those tools in place. Um, the Matamoros thing was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, that was a cult, a horrible thing from the top to the bottom. But even at that point, I mean, I was kind of new to the field at the time, but they had me on Geraldo, and I was sitting there I was with Ted Gunderson, and I was trying to make a case, and the attorney general from Texas and a couple of lieutenant governor, whoever, and a couple of people there were trying to downplay it and say, well, that's a Mexico problem. We don't have that problem. And I said, sirs, I got to tell you, you're so far off. We're working several cases right now in Texas, which I think kind of not really ended my career in law enforcement, but it sure made it a lot more difficult.
I bet the girl, the Padrina, there was the godfather, the guy, Costanzo, but the girl was from El Paso or somewhere over in Texas.
She
She
was,
wasn't. Yeah,
yeah, Brownsville, Texas, Sara
Brownsville, yeah.
Aldrete, and that was his witch. And I did a class at Brownsville University, the college down there, right after Texas Southmost College, I believe it was, right after he was arrested. And they knew her. The professors knew her, and so we're just completely shocked. She gave no indication she was involved in any of that. I think she's still in jail. I don't know what happened to her.
I don't know if you caught this, but there was a 3-part documentary about her in jail and about her life and everything. And she, to me, is clearly lying, and in my opinion, was heavily involved. And a lot of people in the focus of that more Matamoros case, they don't understand that there was like dark things happening and the surrounding all these people, all the way in Mexico City and places. I think they were in Guadalajara too. So everywhere that Costanza went, there were mysterious deaths surrounding him and body parts and incredible stories. Like you just wouldn't believe what that guy was up to.
Oh, he was paid a lot of money by the federales and people in politics and media superstars in Mexico to do rituals for them. Everybody knew him,
He was
and
well known.
very well known.
He was like the witch to the stars. He was involved in the. He realized he went. People don't get. He's from Florida, so he's from Palo. He's using Palo Malombe, Mayombe. I forgot what the name of it, but like witchcraft from Africa, brought it to Mexico, and decided to go to Matamoros because that's where the money was.
Yeah.
So he went there to deal drugs. It wasn't like that was the epicenter. It's like where he ended up. But like you said, he he was the witch to the stars, and a lot of people high up in the government. I think the attorney general or somebody really high up in the Mexican government. But like super dark stuff. Like I mean, he's a witch of the first order. Like
And we,
unbelievable story.
we found the more we started to go up the line with some of the cases we're working with abused kids, and then kids that are being trafficked, it wasn't too much of a surprise to find out how many people in high places were involved, and some of that is public. I'm not saying that they're a criminal, but one of the guys that's the head of the vaccine society or whatever in the government showed up in Vogue magazine with a leather pentacle outfit, and like, okay, this guy's in power. This guy is, and he's committed. And we can go down the line, Governor Tim Walz, and they have a big plaque there by the Satanic people that are thanking him for all the hard work he did and for allowing them to be there. And like, we just don't have any idea how deep and wide it is.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I mean, that guy, he was kind of in the gay BDSM movement. He's also involved in witchcraft. I think he had a Greek name or something like that. But
Yeah.
those are the people like running the government. Like they're around. It's people should be scared about some of these people in there. I mean, in these government, and there's huge child trafficking that happened under Biden. I think it's probably still happening. It may be farther under the surface under Trump, but the numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of children trafficked, some disappeared, and that's probably a component of all this stuff. Like it's just super, super dark.
Yeah, I think it was like 250,000 some odd children that were missing. I think they found 125,000 of them. I don't hold out a lot of hope that the others are even alive at this point, or if they are, they're so far overseas. I've got a couple of friends in ICE that kind of keep me informed about what's going on. One is just kind of a local guy working with law enforcement. I just, this is so extensive and so international that, I would love to see those kids come home, but I just don't know if they will.
Yeah, no, it's really super dark. Like the open borders and the overt criminality was really shocking.
Yeah.
And there's elements of it, like there's stories about Epstein, like there's stories of kids coming from Haiti, there's stories from kids coming from Venezuela to the island, from Mexico to New Mexico. So we don't, the whole story. And these people disappear. They're not old enough to express themselves or tell their stories, and possibly covered up. So there's a lot more to Epstein and everything like that. And even the girl who died mysteriously, Virginia Giuffre, said she saw black robes in the closet at Epstein's mansion when she was there. So there's indicators. Yeah. There's indicators these guys they were involved in dark stuff. Yeah. As your experience goes, this kind of false memory syndrome, the Lanning effect, like how has it really affected our country? How many crimes have occurred because of these large amount of people involved in trying to cover up for satanic crime?
Well, it goes back obviously centuries, almost since the beginning of time with the worship of the god Moloch, sacrifice of innocent children. It's got, you can see the cultural change over the years in our country as occultism was normalized, and then it was made acceptable, and then it was, obviously, one of the things we taught law enforcement. I want to address a comment that somebody has made because I think it's important. We're not hunting witches because we also I used to hear it's a witch hunt. Listen, Wiccans can do whatever they want. You can worship a Twinkie, you can worship a tree, you can worship God or Jesus, whatever. I don't care. But when you cross that line into criminality, then your label doesn't matter anymore. And what we're talking about here is not about persecuting or going after people. It's exposing crimes against children. And if it's somebody that's involved in witchcraft, so be it. If it's somebody that is an atheist, so be it. And I understand the defensiveness in this subject. We certainly have had plenty of Wiccans that showed up in our classes. I had one down in South Texas where a lady that she had been in the LAPD for years, and I was working in the Central Texas area, and she told me she was a high priestess of the Wiccan community, and she said I came in here ready to expose what you were doing, and she said I do want to make a couple of corrections if you don't mind, but other than that, you've really opened up my eyes, and I think we may have a problem in our own community that I need to address, and that's what I was looking for because this problem goes beyond that kind of thing. And when if it's a Christian calls himself a Christian, if you're hurting a kid, I want to see you in jail. If you're a Wiccan, go to jail. Do not pass go. I don't care who it is. And so I think we need to get beyond that narrative. Like Wicca being older than Christianity, it doesn't matter. This isn't a war of Christianity versus Wicca or anything else. And we just need to kind of have the maturity to go beyond that and maybe make a concerted effort to care for the children who are being damaged by these groups.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
another comment, if I could: witches do not believe in Satan. That is a Christian God. That's fine. That's theology. And right now, we're not talking theology. And you may be correct in that. I mean, that certainly has been proven true, that your standard American Wiccan does not believe in Satan. I mean, they do believe in Lucifer and the horn to God, but that's a whole other subject. But this isn't about that. This isn't a theology discussion as much as it is a criminality discussion. Although I appreciate the thoughts of the comments, I felt like a little correction probably needed to go in there.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, these are crimes. They're outside of any ideology. If you're hurting somebody or abusing kids, or some of these things end up in murder, like as bad as murder, these are crimes that you should be prosecuted for, even if, you can take the occult aspects or the black magic aspects of it out of it. You're still involved in that. And there's just so many crimes. Like I see you mention things I've covered: Casso, the Acid Man, the Sellers murders. Like some of these I'd actually mentioned in my research too, because they're such overt um true crime Texas. I mean, but one of the interesting things is, like, people think Texas is doesn't have these occult crimes, but they are occult crimes in Texas too, right?
Absolutely. And we've had them here in El Paso, in Midland, Odessa, Texas, one of the worst. When I first had to actually view a crime scene working with law enforcement and look at the whole setup, it was hard because this poor girl was completely butchered, and the guy got away with it. And that was, and there's other parts of the state where this had happened. So one of the things that interested me, because I know you've done some research into this, the West Memphis case was particularly close to my heart because I think we had trained at the TNOA, it's Texas Narcotics Organization of America, something in. We trained a lot of officers, and I sat under the training of a coroner from Pulaski County in Arkansas, and he sat under my class. And when I heard about the West Memphis murders, I faxed him right away and I said, "Is this what I think it is?" And he said, "It's exactly and everything that you taught us it was." And so I had it from the horse's mouth, the coroner, that this was a satanic crime. And I know they brought my friend Dale in there to testify and basically humiliated him. And I wish I could find the email that he sent me just before he passed away, because I wanted to see how he felt about all these years later. And there was no question in his mind that this was a straight up satanic ritual sacrifice.
There's no question in my mind either, looking at it. So I haven't changed my opinion at all. And one of the things is that all the other witches in the common culture kind of came out in support of them. That was one of the great mysteries of this whole situation, is why are these, like, celebrities supporting all these people? Well, then you look into these celebrities' backgrounds, you go, oh, now I get it. It's like coming to the
Yeah.
conclusion at Rosemary's Baby, where you find out all of them witches. It's really not far from the truth.
It's not. And I wasn't surprised because Damien Eccles is a master manipulator, which is why he's got his own masterful website and selling all of his merch and stuff, and laughing all the way to the bank about everything that happened. But when I heard that Peter Jackson was investing his millions of dollars into his defense, and I guess Johnny Depp wasn't a real surprise because has admitted to his involvement, at least in Wicca. So, I guess it really was a no-brainer that the Wiccan community and other occultists would get on board to defend these kids. My problem with that is they weren't looking at the real facts behind it, and they were trying to defend somebody that I believe was indefensible. And but it was more important to them for the narrative of Wiccan being a harmless deal. One of the posters said that the Wiccan root is do what you will and harm none, which that's great if you follow that.
Right.
But there's
Right.
a lot of people that don't.
Yeah.
And
He
there's
didn't.
people.
Yeah. He presents himself as a white witch too, which is what, and then like in other statements, he's like, I present myself as a white witch, but this is just what I tell other people. And if people who know Gardnerian witchcraft know that there's a Crowley influence, the Crowley actually wrote some of the rituals that Gardner, there's two main strains of witchcraft, and one's Gardnerian, the other's Alexandrian, and Gardner and Crowley's connections aren't in dispute. And
Yeah.
Crowley's very dark, like super dark. Like I know stuff about Crowley, blood drinking and all that stuff, which Damien Eccles is an admitted blood licker, maybe not a drinker, but
Well, it's big, yeah, like huge
that's bad.
difference.
Yeah, huge difference. Yeah.
Well, and you get up to, I wish, one of the things I was going to do before we were no longer the crisis du jour in law enforcement is I wanted to do a whole an hour, 2 hour class on the Manson murders. Because when you start to make the satanic connections to that, it's absolutely mind-boggling. The
Can you expand on
threads.
that? Yeah.
Well, on the surface, of course, you had Sharon Tate, which had just done a movie called 13, where she played a high priestess of a satanic coven. Roman Polanski, of course, had his criminal activity, whatever, that put him in France for a long time. And then you had David Berkowitz, the son of Sam murderer, who came out and said he was part of a group called the Process Church of Final Judgment, and that the films were made, those murders were made as snuff films, which he said were actually sold to Robert Mapplethorpe, the gay artist from New York, and that somehow it had gotten in the hands of Roman Polanski. This is all speculation. Okay, none of this has been proven fact, but the speculation was because the police did say there was a video that they had confiscated that has never shown up. But the speculation is that Polanski burned them on payment. And the rest was what happened, followed after that. So you back up because Manson was this person. You look at his connections. The first Manson murder, I believe his name was Bobby Busalail. And you can trace him back to a movie that was done by one of the first Church of Satan members, Kenneth Onger, who did a movie called Lucifer Rising, which had, I think, Marianne Faithfull, the singer, as Isis, and Bobby Busalail played Lucifer. And then there was another movie that was made, which was kind of about the Church of Satan, in which Mick Jagger did the music for it. And so you start to go through those threads, and you realize that the Process Church had visited Manson in jail after he was convicted. And you just really started to wonder how deep did these things go? And we'll never know for sure. I'd always kind of regretted I couldn't get into to talk to Charlie because he might have been, nuttier than a truckload of pralines, but he knew stuff.
He really did. He was crazy like a fox, though. He was
Yeah.
very deceptive. He knew hypnotism, and he was at the highest level of Scientology. And that's a lot of secret knowledge there. It's
yeah, absolutely.
Occultized.
And he said something just before he died that it always was so intriguing because we're right next to New Mexico here. But they said, well, Charlie, if you get out of jail, where do you want to go live? He says, Deming, New Mexico. And they said, why? He says, because the devil lives there. And I'm like, oh, okay. I think maybe I should do a little more looking around in Deming and see what's really out there. Because that was a pretty direct statement.
Did you find anything?
Not so far. I was working with a guy at the Border Patrol that's been keeping a pretty close eye on things. I know there was some human trafficking going through there, but never really was able to get any further than that.
Well, a lot of those, according to some researchers, Dana She's traced the Process Church to Best Friend Society at the very bottom of Utah, Kanab, Utah, which is somewhat close, northern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico.
That's the animal rescue
Yeah,
place, right? Father Michael.
correct. Yeah, all
Yeah,
that. Father Malachi. So all
yeah.
those guys, she actually took I don't know if you've seen this, but she took the pictures of them in the 70s and like transposed what's on their website within the last 10 years. It's the same people. It's like it's another kind of Rosemary's Baby kind of aha moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, they're making an effort to reconstitute the process, probably under different areas. But and so many of those, I don't know how interconnected they were. But I remember when I was 16, I almost got recruited into a group called the Children of God, which was a hippie cult, and that went on to be this international, really group that was producing child pornography of their own children. And it was just a horrible, horrible international. The person that nearly convinced me, when I met these people, they got off a bus at a Christian event I was at, and this guy got off the bus and he says, "My name's Jeremy Spencer. Do you know who I am?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're like a huge rock god. You're in Fleetwood Mac." And he says, "And I gave up all of that for God, and you should too." So that's the
Wow.
level of people that were involved. I think he's still involved. But then somewhere,
Mm.
I think in the late 90s, the leader's um, son, they called him Davidito. He put out a video. He recorded a video out of Phoenix cleaning his gun, and he said, "I'm going to kill the people that did this to me." And I think he ended up killing the nanny that was partly responsible for his abuse, and then he killed himself. So it was pretty tragic.
And this is like infant abuse and really young kid abuse, and
Yeah,
ostensibly as a Christian church. The guy's founder's name was David Berg, and they were involved in like unspeakable depravity. It was just really horrible. Like when I was at Berkeley, I tell this stuff, told it in other things. I don't want to mention her name, but it was like a river name or one of these kind of strange name. And she would zip in between. I never experienced, now that I'm older, I understand like DID and stuff like that. But she would switch between personalities, and I would just like, what is going on? I don't know what's happening. And and now I know. And she was probably horribly abused, like from a very. And they had a kind of cult outpost in northern Oakland, and they were all there, and it just the vibes were really yeah. It
and
wasn't Christian.
speaking of river, I want to just because you start again to pull the threads. Some stuff like it's unprovable, but River Phoenix, raised in the Children of God, admitted that he lost his virginity to an adult when he was 5 years old, and that's why he was so goofed up. And the Children of God's children's choir had just got through singing for the Bush One White House. So some people in Congress subpoenaed River to come and testify. He was supposed to testify mid-November that year, but on Halloween night he was hot shot with heroin at Johnny Depp's Viper Room. So we'll never know what his testimony is.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, that's incredible. My understanding is somebody came up behind him with a shot, like you said, hot shot, but he thought it was something different, but it was 5 times the lethal dose of both heroin and meth. That's what I heard. So
Yeah,
like he was thinking, oh, some drugs, but like you said, a hot shot. Yeah.
and somebody just posted probably happened to Joaquin too. And of course, he was part of the Children of God, and he really went off the rails here. And for a period of time, he was showing up on talk shows all disheveled and barely able to communicate. Everybody thought it was a joke. I never thought it was a joke. I think he's barely holding himself together.
I think his family took the family and went to Mexico, like really kind of cult type stuff, crossing borders like the finders, taking people to Mexico or kids to Mexico. These are
Yeah,
like indicators of trafficking and stuff like that. I mean, you
absolutely.
mentioned all this stuff. It's amazing because I'm scanning through your book and you mentioned Vallely. I didn't know that. And I mentioned Vallely to you, but you had it in your book already. So kudos to you. But yeah, there's like Satanist in behind this TPU USA stuff. I'll try to send and follow up with people about what Baron Coleman found. But it's really, it just shows networked Satanism. Some bigwig in New York City, with money is affiliated with Aquino.
Yeah.
It's really like people just don't imagine these things happening. But a lot of these elites dedicate their life to the devil, and that's what their payoff is: power and money and control and all that stuff. Rose McGowan too. Yeah, she was in the Children of God too. So I think
I didn't
that's,
know that.
yeah, I didn't know that either.
Well,
I mean, I vaguely remember that.
when you go back again, the most important thing for me when I did law enforcement, I would start out by saying, for the next 8 hours, unless I say this is speculation, everything that you're going to see is true, factual, documented. And that's been very important to me because one of the things that happened when we started to investigate, there was a disinformation campaign that came in that totally messed up the survivor network. There were people coming in claiming to be survivors and they weren't. There was all this information. So one of my standard thoughts is I want to be able to say what is and what isn't. You go to somebody like um, Anton LaVey. He was very useful in normalizing Satanism. He was able to get Jane Mansfield as his first high priestess, and then he was able to get Davis Jr. as a member. Later on, Marilyn Manson, because it was fun for them. I think Sammy figured out at the end it probably wasn't very fun, and decided to, get out. But he was useful, not necessarily criminal. Somebody like Aquino, we don't know for sure, but it's very important that we do our best to sort facts from fiction, because if we get it wrong, it gives the other side a reason to mock and say we don't know what we're talking about.
Right. What I mean, you knew Ted Gunderson. What's your opinion of him? Because I've had kind of mixed messages. I don't know the truth. What do you think?
I love Ted. I mean,
Okay.
I enjoyed being with him. And this is just my opinion. I think he got compromised by the wrong people. One person that claimed to be a deprogrammer that nearly ended my life. And next thing you know, Ted is off chasing gray aliens at Area 51. I'm like, what the heck happened to him? And it was heartbreaking because he was credible until he started to associate with some of these people that I believe were disinformation campaigns.
Interesting.
And one
Like
of the
all this
people,
stuff. It's disinfo, FMSF, False Memory Syndrome Foundation, disinfo,
exactly.
Satanic Panic, disinfo. There's
Hmm.
just so many campaigns. There's so many online people saying you're crazy or this isn't true. I mean, I've endured it all. So it's interesting. Gunderson, as a guy coming from I think he had a really good kind of FBI career. It's interesting that he got infiltrated. It seems like he got cognitively infiltrated. Would you agree with
I
that?
really, no, absolutely. I
Okay.
believe he did. And I will never discount the work that he did, particularly on the McMartin case. Like I said, when he got in touch with these other people, this one particular deprogrammer, then that's when everything fell apart. And then another guy came into the picture that was saying he was a deprogrammer, and he was promoting all this stuff, and it was like 90% true and 10% just dangerous lies. Pretty soon the survivor community is attacking each other, and it was just ridiculous. And then we found out his ex-wife sent us she divorced him and had a whole list of his false passports and false driver's licenses and all of that. I'm like, well, yeah.
What's your thoughts about McMartin? Like, there's been studies on the tunnels, and there's like indicators I think that have come to the surface of like certainly child abuse, but occult influences. What's your view?
It was a botched case. Prosecutors left out a ton of evidence. For example, the fact that most of those children had some form of venereal disease. They didn't bring that into court, and they kept leaving out stuff. So the defense team was brutal. The prosecutors didn't really prosecute it well, and the outcome, of course, is it became part of the Satanic Panic narrative. They did find evidence of the tunnels. I've actually got a photograph of the paper plate that had the pentagram on it that they found under the tunnel. Yeah,
That report's there. I talked to that guy. I sent an email to him when I worked for Opperman. His name, he had a like Stryber or Steiner, I think was his name. Like, it's a legit report. So it
no,
validated the kids' stories, right? The
it
tunnel,
absolutely did.
into the apartment next door, and that's how they would take the kids out of there. And the kids independently had different stories, and they overturned it by, like, the so-called interviewer is skewing their views, but there was a lot of independent stories and creepy stuff. And one of the indicators for me is they took that place, McMartin, and torched it. Now it's a laundromat. Whenever something gets like bulldozed, it's a scene of, like, for me, that's like a scene of a crime. Like, nobody wants to buy it, nobody, because they know something bad happened there. And
Yeah.
the kid Bucky or Buckley or whatever, Raymond Bucky, was seen wearing the triangular magical hat.
Hmm.
Like that's a magic hat. So I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. There were, for people who don't know, there were I think two attempts at getting a conviction, right? So there was one at the most expensive trial in LA history. So there was one that, like, was a hung, and then another one, and I don't remember the outcome, but yeah,
Yeah.
really heavily disturbing stuff. Yeah. I mean, another networked story, and a lot of disinfo.
And that's what it made it so difficult. And when we advocated for children, I don't think there was a single case that I worked on. It wasn't many, but there were a few where the case fell through because they brought the false memory syndrome people in to discredit the children, and then the case just got lost, and the children got returned to the abusers. It was infuriating, and that's why we had an exact identical case to McMartin here in El Paso, and I went for the retrial because they had convicted the two ladies that they said were responsible for what was happening to the kids, and then some lawyer said, well, they need to face their accuser. We can't do videotapes. So they made the children go back to court. I'd met several of the children, or a few of the children involved, and then went to court and watched the judge fall asleep during the trial. One of the perpetrators was allowed to make faces at the children to scare them. And some reporter interviewed me outside the courtroom, and I made the mistake of telling her a little bit about my background in the occult. And I told her I did not want my name made public. And next thing you know, she blows my cover in the Texas Observer. And she's gone on to be one of the greatest apologists for pedophiles in the journalistic world.
Wow.
So that's how, and after that, the case was just done. But I got calls from parents. I got one of the calls from a parent whose son was now, I don't know, close to 14 years old or something, maybe 10 years older, but they had gone to the park to get pictures for their uh, foot or baseball team. And next thing you know, her son is at the top of the tree screaming his heart out and saying, "Mommy, that's the man that took the photos." And because the photographer had shown up, I got a call from one of the McMartin kids that had just turned 19, and he called me in the middle of the night and he said, "Do you still have flashbacks? Because I can't make them stop." You tell me that's false memories.
Right. There were some big names in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation too, like bigwig doctors. I think Jolly West was involved in that too. Is that right?
I think so. And someone just asked this question about McMartin, said there was a doctor. I don't know who doctor who lived there, but I know there was a psychologist who worked on the McMartin case, Catherine Gould, and she was a crack psychologist. Um, but they completely discredited her at some point.
Right. So it was like a full court press, like, discredit everybody. They're still doing it. It's still happening.
Oh, sure.
Greg, do you have time for some questions? Let's go through them in turn. Let's see if I can find something. Somebody asked, Jan Vier or Jan Vier or Javier. I asked Dr. Reid what he thinks about demon possession and how to help someone. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I wrote an entire book on it called War of the Ages, because that's something that I've had to do for the last, I don't know, 40 some odd years of my life or more. It's real. It needs to be handled correctly. Um, and I believe that that's a very real phenomenon.
Right. I think you're right too. I agree with that. Yeah, you have to be very careful too, and seek out somebody who has knowledge. I wouldn't mess around. There's people out there. Dr. Reid, have you heard of cold activity in the 1970s in Denver, Colorado? That's from Lizzie.
Yes, definitely. Not just Denver, but Fort Collins. There's a town up in Colorado. I can't think of the name of it, but it's like almost exclusively Wiccan and Satanic. Um, And in my law enforcement classes, I taught that all roads lead through Colorado, because that was one of the strongest child trading routes, went right through those cities.
Wow, I didn't know that. Bart says, wasn't River Phoenix in Stand By Me? Yes, he was. And were there not some allegations connected to the child actors in that movie? Well, there's rumors about the father. Rob Reiner was the director who just met a tragic end. And there's been stories about that guy in some rumor mills, which I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Greg?
Not particularly that, but I know the other person in Stand By Me, of course, was Corey Feldman,
That's
who,
right.
he's been very vocal about the abuse that he and Corey Haim went through in their lifetime. So, I mean, Hollywood's it's a cesspool. I grew up in Hollywood. I knew some of the inner workings of that world, and nothing surprises me, and no name that comes out surprises me in conjunction with all this.
Gotcha. Michelle, Ted Gunderson living with Jacqueline McGauley was shady.
I hate
That's
to
what I
speak
heard.
evil of the dead, not speaking ill of the dead, but Ted was a womanizer, and it became a problem with his credibility.
He liked women. There's an old interview that Visigoth Keith Hansen did with Jackie McGauley. If anybody has that in their archives or can find it, send it to me. Don't send me some link to it. Send me the actual file. Like, I don't want the actual copy. I don't want some shady link that doesn't work, because that's what people send me. It's crazy. Have you heard about the just released testimony of Sasha Riley? I don't know who that is. Hog. Have you heard of that, Greg?
No, I've not. I haven't heard of that.
Okay. Oh, she accuses Trump, and it's in Substack with audio. I don't know. Michelle, the triplex next to McMartin is still there. Who was the doctor who lived there when the investigations were happening? Can resident records be searched? Are you aware of that, Greg, at all?
No, I'm not. Not sure how to search that either.
Okay. Let's see. Any other? Was the False Memory Foundation paid to discredit the abuse victims? What do you think?
We can never know for sure, but I know people like Ralph Underweger were getting in the 100,000 figures to go in and tell the courts that children lie and get their sexual thoughts from their parents' porn collection. So there was some big money involved.
The False Memory Foundation, or whatever, Syndrome Foundation, was well funded. They had like literature. They had, for that time, they had like either a magazine or a publication or anything. I mean, it's really, you can go back to history's there. You can find it. I mean, that's a whole nother show I should do, but
they had a lot of money. I mean, it wasn't in the millions. I think it was under $1 million, but they were pretty well funded.
There was also a film about McMartin that kind of was critical, that was done by Oliver Stone, and it kind of made the prosecution look like a bunch of the doctor was quoted in newspaper articles. A lot of that stuff can be found at newspapers.com. So there's a lot of like concurrent journalism. I don't know the quality of that at all, but
it's like the Paradise Lost series by HBO on the West Memphis thing. What a farce that was.
Yeah, I call them mockumentaries. They're not even, they don't fit the actual definition of a documenting what happened, like a documentary, because they're just so, like, once you find out that the people were paid by HBO, like, you talk about loss of credibility, you're not even being honest. Somebody's paying you $500 or $600, and some of the I'm not going to name names, but some of the parents were on taking money for interviews and things like that, and it got really just Hollywoodized is a good way. Hollywoodized in the worst possible way. Any other questions for the guests? We're at the hour mark, Greg. I don't want to keep you too long. Let's see. Pamela knew a family was torn apart by the SM False Memory Foundation. One of their daughters began drawn by them, accused the family. I remember that. There was a daughter who accused a parent, and it destroyed it. But yeah, there's a whole nother show there for the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed, Greg, before we wrap it up?
Well, I think that kind of gives the surface view of a very complex issue. I just want to encourage people to find out the truth about this. I know, and with not trying to be offensive, but I know there have been some comments here about, child pornography coming out of Gaza, and was that the witches doing it? And look, I have friends. I have a family member that's Wiccan. I'm not anti anybody. I'm just saying this is some heavy information, and it's worth us just seeking after the truth and to go after these things when we find it to be true. Discard the rest. Be a truth seeker, because the life of a child could be at risk if we don't get this right.
Great. That's a great way to end it. And you can be found at your website, full name GregoryReid.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And all
And
your
go
ahead.
got a podcast. It's called Extreme Times: Truth in the Shadowlands.
Podcast Extreme Times, Truth in the Shadowlands. Again, it's Youth Fire Ministries. His website is GregoryReid.com. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just thank you for the work you're doing. We really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you for your work. Again, the book that just came out in late 2025 was really kind of the intro topic to our discussion. And the full title of that book, check it out, is The Real Satanic Panic Story, documenting the reality of occult crime and ritual abuse. And again, the guest's full name is Gregory R. Reid. So, Gregory, thanks so much for your time, and love to have you back anytime. Thank you.
Anytime. Just let me know.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
You.